as we speak.
It is.
So, Jonathan, I want to give you a scenario which is no longer really a scenario. It's something that's looking more and more likely to happen. The U.S. has been bombing Houthi targets in Yemen.
Yep.
Just yesterday, we've heard President Trump's remarks. We've heard the Iranian president refusing to negotiate. And now the United States has moved the Spirit stealth bombers to the island, as we can see on the screen behind us, to Diego Garcia.
Yep.
Which is just 3,000 miles from Iran. And these are meant to carry out, you don't just send a B-2 bomber into the air. They are meant to carry out a deeply penetrating attack. In this type of evolving situation, the likes of which I don't remember, what do you think is the next move?
First of all, I think it's important to have people know that I think we are still within the boundaries of negotiations. I don't think that the US or Iran have decided to break that equation and to venture into the realm of actual kinetic operations, to use military assets and to fight physically on the battlefield. I think that especially the US, there's still a few layers or a few milestones, diplomatic milestones for the US to go through, motions to go through until we reach a time where that will be necessary and possible and the right thing to do, to use those bombers. If you ask me, we passed those milestones a long time ago. We've been doing diplomacy, sanctions and condemnations for the better part of 15, 20 years against Iran. And today, Iran is rushing towards weaponizing. They're no longer only enriching nuclear material. They've passed that milestone and they have that covered. It's no longer about enrichment. They have all the enriched material that they need. Now it's about weaponizing and really turning what they have into a functioning bomb, which, according to Israeli intel and American intel, is what the Iranians are busy doing now. And both sides, when I say both, I mean US, and a certain part of that is Israel, and then Iran on the other side. Both sides are posturing and signaling to the other side what the cost would be if we don't agree to a certain deal that doesn't necessitate the use of force. Now, what this move means is stepping up in terms of the intensity of the threat, and it's basically the US saying that there is a viable military option. It's on the table, and if we don't make good, solid progress right now, then that military option comes much closer to front and center, and the chances of using it are elevating. Now, the Iranians have had so much time, so many off-ramps, so many opportunities to choose a different path, but each time that they were presented with the dilemma, what does the Iranian regime do? Do they focus on prosperity? Do they focus on nation building? Do they focus on the future of the Iranian people? Or do they focus on achieving nuclear weapons and strengthening the regime? Each and every time that dilemma has been presented, the regime has chosen nuclear and has chosen the regime over the Iranian people. And the situation today in Iran is bad and getting worse by the day. Their currency reached a grim milestone of one Iranian rial to one US dollar to 1 million Iranian rial. It was 70 when the Iranian revolution started and when Khomeini and his mullahs took over Iran. And that type of management has really driven the country of Iran, rich in resources, rich in human capital and potential, vast in land and terrain. It has driven that country down the drain because the priority has been nuclear weapons, extremism, terrorism, and what they call the expansion of their Islamist revolution. So where we are now, bottom line, the stakes are higher. We are closer to using, the US is closer to using a military tool. And I think that it's really only a question of time before that or some other military tool becomes reality. I, as an Israeli, think that the likelihood, it is much more likely that Israel will find the courage and the tools necessary and actually go and do what needs to be done. I'm not entirely sure that the U.S. is willing, politically, capable definitely, military speaking, but is the U.S. willing to do so politically? Still unclear. But I think that Israel has, first and foremost, necessity. Israel has to take action, because otherwise Iran will develop nuclear weapons, and then they will have that giant nuclear umbrella to extend above all of their proxy terror organizations, those who remain and those that they will build in the future. And that will be a tremendous strategic challenge and a real existential threat for Israel. So Israel has the motivation. Israel has the tools. I think Israel is still waiting for the U.S. to exhaust the process, the diplomatic process. Once that will be done, Israel will be faced with the reality of having the necessity to take action. And if you ask me, that is what Israel will do, hopefully not by itself.
So if I look at the map and we're looking at, there's a 3,000-mile distance from Diego to Iran.
Yep.
And we can see from Iran to Jordan, Israel's kind of actually ironically missing on our map here.
Yeah.
There's something in between which is called Saudi Arabia,
yep.
right? For our viewers, Riyadh and all this large landmass is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and Iran had a surprising reconciliation, a degree of reconciliation that was carried out very recently, of all places in China.
Yeah.
But it was done. How do you see Saudi responding if Israel has to go through their airspace to attack Iran?
Yeah, that's an if, because I think what Israel has done with a lot of strategic foresight over the last months is to blast
my friends,
a path,
it is
basically clear an aerial path that doesn't necessitate the use of Saudi airspace. And what Israel did a few months back, when HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, took control over Syria and unseated the Syrian dictator, a few days after that, Israel launched a strategic operation, very good one, very clean and very precise, where Israel took out almost all of the air defenses, I'd say all air defenses in Syria, and almost all of their strategic weapons and research and development facilities, but more to the point, air defenses. So today, if Israel needs to carry out operations above Iranian airspace, then Israel has the ability, according to my understanding, to do so with relative ease. Nothing is easy when you're flying in the Middle East, but relative ease in order to get to where they need to go. Iraq doesn't have a lot of air defenses, if at all, and once Syria isn't much of a threat, then that paves the way for Israeli planes to go in. Israel has the capability, fifth generation aircraft, the F-35Is, with the ability to penetrate and open up a path, and then other aircraft, 15s mostly, to deliver the ordnance. And then, of course, the dilemma, and I think you're very correct in speaking about Saudi, because the Saudis will be at kind of a dilemma when we look at tactical operations and the current military situation, but also when we draw the connection between that and the bigger geopolitical situation in the Middle East. We know, based on various reports, many of them I think very credible, that there is a deal in the works. It has been in the works for years. October 7, Hamas's assault on Israel sidelined that or derailed it. But the deal to be made is one of mutual recognition between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the State of Israel, an expansion, a dramatic and very important and futurely prosperous expansion of the Abraham Accords, and to build that bridge between the Saudis and Israel. The dilemma for the Saudis will be, will they allow Israel to use Saudi airspace as part of operations? Interesting question. I think they will probably defer to the very last minute until they commit to something like that. And I think Israel will use creative ways in order to have various other options so that we won't have to rely on Saudi airspace. But what I think is more important is, where will it lead in the future, right? Whatever happens between Israel and Iran, long-term politically speaking, Israel definitely wants to expand the Abraham Accords. Israel wants to solidify its diplomatic ties in the region. Israel wants to build bridges. Israel wants to improve its prosperity, but also be a kind of a generator for regional prosperity. And this, by the way, I think transcends U.S. partisan politics as well, because former President Biden, when he was here, he signed the Jerusalem Declaration. The Jerusalem Declaration is all about expanding peace in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Israel, linking that up to Southeast Asia, and having this area of the world, the Arabian Peninsula and the Israeli coast with Jordan in the middle also benefiting from it, as a gateway to Europe, as a gateway to the West for energy, for communications, for commerce. Many beautiful things can, and I hope will happen once that turns into reality, and hopefully we'll have both sides of the aisle in the U.S. in Congress supporting it and working for it. It's good for U.S. interests, it's good for Saudi, and from my perspective, very good for Israeli interests.
Very interesting. So you're basically, if I understand correctly, saying that there's almost like a line being drawn in the sand right now within Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia is positioning itself. It's now made some type of accommodation with Iran, possibly, yet it is looking towards the Abraham Accords, which is being pushed by the United States. And I guess there's a lot on the table right now, depending how Saudi Arabia will look at Israel and the United States in terms of dealing with Iran. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think that the Saudi deal or rapprochement with the Iranians was much more signaling. I interpret it as signaling to the U.S. that if you don't own up to being the world's most important superpower, a force for good, for order, and for a value-based, law and order-based global order. If you don't do that, then we are going to look for other options, and the other option is China. We need security guarantees. We want strategic and military guarantees, and if they're not provided by the U.S., then we will look elsewhere. And I think that the Saudis were okay with doing that, and the Chinese were definitely very happy to, poke the U.S. in the eye. But I think that at the end of the day, it really boils down to how truthful and how energetic will the U.S. be in reestablishing itself in the region, in making sure that its allies know that the U.S. can be trusted and that the U.S. Will provide security guarantees. I think if the Saudis are really convinced of that, then the margin or the area of dilemma for the Saudis whether or not to go into the Abraham Accords will be so much smaller, and I think that'll be very positive. I think it would be convenient not to speak about it, but I think it wouldn't be professional. We have to mention the whole Palestinian issue, the insistence of many Arab countries for 76 years to condition recognition of Israel and peace and prosperity with a two-state solution or any type of political solution to the Palestinian conflict. I think that's the biggest dilemma, sadly, that the Saudis will have to deal with. And here they'll have to choose between their own strategic interests and their own future, stability, access to security guarantees from the U.S., deterrence against Iran, whatever will be left of the Iranian regime, and on the other hand, virtue signaling and still supporting a losing cause that has had so many opportunities to do right and so many opportunities to reach peace, but each time the Palestinians chose not to. And up until now, they've had almost automatic support from Arab countries. I think that's changing, and I think October 7, before and after October 7, was a very big watershed moment also in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because today many people understand, even though they're perhaps not courageous enough to acknowledge it, but many people understand that the voice that most authentically represents the Palestinian mindset is the voice of Hamas. It is the voice of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that is based on what Palestinians are saying in Palestinian polls, what they say and the kind of political views that they espouse in poll after poll, election or semi-election after semi-election. And the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, all of the other Arab countries, they know that the Muslim Brotherhood is trouble. And once Palestinian society has gone that hardline extreme way, I think what that needs to do is to make the dilemma easier for the Saudis to say, okay, this so-called cause that we've allowed it to condition development and prosperity in the Middle East, we don't need to continue to babysit this anymore. And if they don't want peace, if they're going towards the way of jihad and the way of war against Israel and sacrifice and blood and terror, that's their choice. We, the Saudis, shouldn't hinge our future on that. And I think we're going into that direction. We're perhaps not there yet, but I hope we will be going into that direction. And I hope that the Saudis will be able to make a good decision for themselves, not for Palestinians and not for Israel. A good, sound, logical decision for themselves.
So, Jonathan, there's a lot that's on the table right now. We've got the Palestinian situation and the way Saudi Arabia looks at that, and also the complication or the interesting part that it is clear today, obviously to Saudi Arabia, but to the rest of the world, that Iran has been financing Hamas and that Iran was very much part of the architect of October 7th. Saudi Arabia knows this and the Arab world knows this. They also see the massive change that's taken place throughout the Middle East because of Iran's tentacles that are spreading throughout this region. What would it take? And President Trump did say that there was an option for tariffs or for a blockade, depending on what choice Iran goes for. It's not necessarily a fait accompli for a military attack on Iran. What would it require Iran to do in order for the U.S. to say, okay, we're not going to launch our B-2 stealth bombers to attack, and we're not going to have Israel attack Iran?
Yeah. So I think there's interesting developments here as well, because for many years, basically 15 years, the whole nuclear discussion was about enrichment, right? At what level, what percentage? Is it 60%, 62, 90%? Is it weapons grade enrichment? And a lot of technical terms. But lots of people who understand nuclear physics and lots of people who don't, myself included, we spoke about enrichment. That is a conversation of the past. That's a milestone that is no longer relevant because the Iranians, through perseverance, focus and priority, ingenuity and sacrifice throughout many years, have stayed their course, and they have enhanced their enrichment capabilities with new and very powerful and fast-working enrichment centrifuges. They've been able to basically overcome that issue, and today they have enough enriched material for at least 5 bombs and the ability to do more and faster. So that isn't the issue anymore. Why is that relevant? Why do I speak of that? Because in the past, international intervention was about inspecting those enrichment sites. Today, what we have to be looking at are all of the various sites in Iran where they may be conducting weaponization, where they may be doing experiments in advanced metals, detonating mechanisms, where they will be fusing everything together into warheads, where they connect a warhead to a ballistic missile. And all, that is where the conversation is now. And I think it was a positive milestone to hear President Trump and also I think it was Waltz who spoke about it, National Security Advisor, who spoke about the need to inspect each and every location in Iran that is remotely related to their nuclear program and to disarm. Not only inspect, but to have a full and complete disarmament of what they've been able to produce so far and the infrastructure that the Iranian regime used in order to produce these capabilities. That's where we are now. And I think if the Iranians today understand that they're facing a real serious dilemma where there's a real tangible military option on the table and there's a political will to use it, Israel or the US or both, if they understand that that is where they are and that they have one out of 2 options, what they need to do in order to save themselves, save their future and perhaps their regime is to abide by a very comprehensive and deep exposure of everything related to their nuclear research and weaponization.